Okay, guys, so here it is, the last two chapters of Indian in the Cupboard. I'm just going to read them straight through, chapters 15 and 16, all at once, okay? So, ready to finish the book? I am. All right, chapter 15, Underfloor Adventure. Omri and Patrick decided they must take it in turns to sit up all night with Boone. This was going to be tricky because of light showing under the door, but Omri unearthed the lopsided remains of a candle he had made himself from a candle-making kit. We can put it behind the dressing-up crate. Then the light won't show. They got into their pajamas. Patrick was supposed to be sleeping on a folding bed, so they got it ready to avoid arousing suspicion. When Omri's mother came in to kiss them goodnight, they were both in bed, apparently reading. The fact that Omri was reading in semi-darkness was nothing unusual. She was always at him about it. "Oh, Omri, why won't you switch your bedside light on? You'll ruin your eyes." "It doesn't work," said Omri promptly. "Yes, it does. Daddy fixed it this morning. You know what was wrong with it?" "What?" asked Omri impatiently, wishing for once that she would go. "That wretched rat of Gillen's had made a nest under the floorboards and lined it with bits of insulation and gnawed off the wires. It's a wonder it didn't electrocute itself." Omri sat up sharply. "Do you mean it's got loose?" His mother gave a lopsided smile. "Where have you been keeping yourself? It's been loose since last night. Haven't you noticed Gillen frantically looking for it? It seems to have taken up residence under your bed." "Under my bed?" Omri yelled, leaping out of it and dropping to his knees. "It's no use looking for it. I mean right under the floor. Daddy caught a glimpse of it today when he had the boards up, but he couldn't reach it, of course. It's a matter of waiting till it comes out for food, and then—" But Omri wasn't listening. A rat? That was all they needed. "Mom, we've got to get it. We've got to." "Why? You're not scared of it, are you?" "Me? Scared of that stupid rat? Of course not. But we've got to catch it," said Omri desperately. He felt wild and furious. How could Gillen have let the thing go? The perils that a rat represented to his little men simply turned his blood cold. And why, of all rooms in the house, should it have chosen his? He was tearing frantically at the edge of the carpet, trying to pull it back, when his mother hiked him to his feet. "Omri, that carpet and those floorboards have been taken up once today. They've been put back once and everything tidied up. Rat or no rat, I'm not going through it all again tonight. Now, get into bed and go to sleep." "But into bed," I said. "Now." When she used that tone, there was no arguing with her. Omri got into bed, was kissed, and watched the light go off and the door close. As soon as her footsteps had faded, he leaped up again, and so did Patrick. "Now we must definitely stay awake all night. We mustn't close our eyes for a moment," said Omri. He was hunting through his ancient collection of book matches for one out of which his father had not cut the matches. At last he found one and lit the candle. They very gently moved Boone's bed out of hiding onto the bedside table, set the candle beside it, and sat one on each side, watching Boone's dreadfully ill-looking face. The pink square Band-Aid moved fractionally up and down as he breathed. You could hardly see it. It was like watching the long hand of a clock moving. Only the strongest concentration enabled them to detect the faint motion. "Hadn't we better move the seed box up here, too?" whispered Patrick. In the moment when Little Bear had shot Boone, Omri had almost been angry enough to have fed him to the rat, but now his fury had cooled. He certainly didn't want anything awful to happen to him. "Yes, let's." Between them, they cleared a place on the table and lifted the seed box with its longhouse, fireplace, and hitching posts up out of reach of the prowling rodent. "Careful, don't frighten the horses." The horses, however, were getting used to being carried about and hardly looked up from munching their little piles of grass cuttings. There was no sign of life from the longhouse. There followed a timeless period of just sitting there silently, their eyes fixed on Boone's still figure in the flickering candlelight. Omri began to feel lightheaded after a bit. The candle flame went fuzzy, and Boone's body seemed to vibrate as he stared at it. At the very back of his mind, something else was nagging. He didn't ask himself what this was, because he had a superstitious feeling that if he let his mind wander from Boone, even for a minute, Boone would slip away into death. It was as if only Omri's will and Patrick's were keeping that tiny, fragile heart beating. Suddenly, though, a thought, like a landscape lit up by lightning, flashed to the forefront of Omri's brain. He sat up, his eyes wide open, and his breath held. "Patrick!" Patrick jumped. He'd been half asleep. "What?" "The key! I know where it is." Where? Where? Right under my feet. It must have dropped through the floorboards when Dad opened them. There is nowhere else it could be. Patrick gazed at him in admiration, but also in dismay, which means kind of disappointment. How are we going to get it? He whispered. We'll have to take up the carpet first. Maybe Dad didn't nail all the boards down. Moving very quietly, they managed to lift one corner of Omri's bed and kick back the edge of the carpet from underneath. Another bit was under the bedside table leg, and that was tricky, but they shifted it between them in the end. Carefully, they folded the corner of the carpet back on itself, exposing the boards. Omri then stuck his fingers down the narrow cracks at the ends of the boards, one after another, testing to see if they could be lifted. Only one of them could. The rest were nailed down to the joists underneath. Making as little noise as possible, he hadn't heard his parents go to bed yet, Omri pried up the short end of the board. A hole about 6 inches by 18 gaped in the light of the candle Patrick was holding. Even when he put the candle down the hole, they couldn't see much. We'll have to risk the bedside light, Omri said. They switched it on and carried it on its cord down to the hole. Kneeling on the floor, they peered into the depths. They could make out the dusty lath and plaster about a foot down, the top side of the ceiling of the room below, the room where Omri's parents were now sitting. We'll have to be dead quiet or they'll hear us. Dead quiet doing what? Asked Patrick. It's not there. You'd see it if it was. It must be under one of the nailed-down boards, said Omri despairingly. At that moment, they heard Little Bear calling them, and they stood up. He was standing outside the longhouse, naked but for his breechcloth. His hair hung loose, his face and chest and arms were smeared with ashes, his feet were bare. Little Bear, what are you doing? Asked Omri, aghast at his appearance. Want fire, want make dance, call spirits, make Boone live. Omri looked at him for a moment and felt an ache in his throat that reminded him painfully of his babyish days when he used to cry all the time, days he thought he'd left behind forever. Little Bear, dancing won't do any good. The spirits won't help. We need a doctor. To get the doctor, we need the key. Would you help find it? Little Bear didn't move a muscle. I help. Gently, Omri picked him up. He knelt on the floor and put his hand down in the hole. Patrick held the light. Omri opened his hand and Little Bear stood on it, looking around into the dusty, dark tunnel stretching away under the floor. I think it's somewhere down there, Omri said quietly, on the other side of that wooden wall. You'll have to find a way through, a hole or crack or something. We'll give you all the light we can, but it's bound to be awfully dark on the other side. Do you think you can do it? I go, said Little Bear immediately. Right, start looking for a way through. Little Bear, a tiny, vulnerable figure, strode off through the dust into the darkness under the floor. Omri pulled the lampshade off the bedside table and thrust the bulb down into the hole. He couldn't get his head in to watch, and Little Bear went out of sight almost at once. Is there a way through? He whispered down the tunnel. Yes, came Little Bear's voice. Big hole. Go through. Omri, give light. Omri pushed the light down his... Pause for a second. Sorry, Noisy Dog is now outside. Can you see anything? He whispered as loudly as he dared. There was no answer. He and Patrick knelt there for an age. There wasn't a sound. Then Patrick said suddenly, did he take his bow and arrows? No. Why? What if, Omri, what if he meets the rat? Omri had totally forgotten about the rat in the excitement of realizing what had happened to the key. Now he felt a strange jerk in his chest, as if his heart had hiccuped. He bent his head till his face was in the hole. He could smell the dust. The bright bulb was between him and the place where Little Bear had presumably gone through a hole in the joist into the next section of the underfloor space. A hole. What could make a hole right through a joist? What else but a rat, gnawing away all day? A rat at this moment out on his night prowl, a hungry rat who hadn't eaten for 24 hours, a pink-eyed, needle-toothed, omnivorous giant rat. Little Bear, Omri called frantically into the blankness. Come back, come back. Utter silence. And then he heard something. But it wasn't Little Bear's voice. It was the scuttering sound of a rodent's hard little hairless feet on lath and plaster. Little Bear! Omri! It was a voice from the room below. What are you doing up there? It was his mother. Then, quite distinctly, he heard his father's voice. "I can hear that blasted rat pattering about overhead. It's probably keeping the boys awake." "I'd better go up," said his mother. A door closed below, and they heard her coming up the stairs. Even this dire prospect hardly had power to do more than push Omri's desperation one stage farther. He probably wouldn't have moved from his place on the floor if Patrick hadn't acted swiftly. "Quick, light off, into bed." He pulled Omri up, snatched the lamp out of his hand, and switched it off. The candle was still down the hole. Patrick shoved the floorboard roughly back into position and moved the carpet so that it more or less covered the boards if you didn't look closely. Then he pushed Omri into his bed, covered him up. The footsteps were nearly at the door, and had just flung himself down onto the folding bed when the door opened. Omri lay there with his eyes squeezed shut, thinking, "Don't put the light on, don't put the light on." Light was coming into the room from the landing, but not enough to see anything much. His mother stood there for what seemed 100 years. Finally she whispered, "Are you boys asleep?" Needless to say, she got no reply. "Omri," she tried once more. Then, after another 100 years, during which Omri imagined Little Bear bitten in half by the rat right underneath where he was lying, the door closed again, leaving them in darkness. "Wait, wait," breathed Patrick. It was torture to wait. The rat had stopped moving when all the scuffling and footsteps had started. That was something. But now it was quiet again. Omri imagined it creeping toward its prey, its pink nose twitching, its albino whiskers trembling hungrily. Oh, how could he have let Little Bear go down there? Boone's death would at least not have been his fault, but if Little Bear was killed, Omri knew he would never forgive himself. At long last, the living room door closed, and both boys stole out of bed again. Patrick reached the light first. Omri grabbed it, but Patrick insisted on looking first to see if Boone was still breathing. He was. They rolled back the carpet and lifted the board again, terrified that each movement would attract the grown-ups below. The homemade candle was burning away in the gloom, like a little torch in a disused mine, throwing its eerie light down the tunnel. Omri lay down flat. He didn't dare raise his voice, but he called softly, "Little Bear, are you there? Come back. You're in terrible danger." Silence. "Oh, God, why doesn't he come?" Omri whispered frenziedly. At that moment, they did hear something. It was hard to identify the sound. It was the rat, all right, but what was it doing? There was no running sound, just a sort of tiny shock, as if it had made one short, sudden movement. A pounce? Omri's heart was in his mouth. Then there were other sounds. If he had not got used to straining his ears to catch the voices of the little men, he might not have heard it, but he did hear it, and hope nearly lifted him off the ground. It was a faint, light, scrambling sound, the sound of a small body getting through a hole in a hurry. Omri pulled the lamp back out of the hole and thrust his arm in instead, his hand open. Almost at once he felt Little Bear run into it. Omri closed his fingers just as something warm and fuzzy brushed against their backs. Oh, so close. He snatched his arm out, grazing his knuckles against the splintery wood. There was something else in his hand, something cold and knobbly, twice as heavy as Little Bear. He opened his fingers, and both boys leaned over to look. Sitting on Omri's palm, filthy and bedraggled, but triumphant, was Little Bear, and cradled in his arms, trailing cobwebs and a red satin ribbon, was the missing key. "You've done it! Oh, Little Bear, good for you! Now, quick!" said Omri. "Patrick, get the candle up and put the floor back. I'll find the Red Cross man." Reckless now, they switched the top light on. Patrick, being as quiet as he could, replaced the floorboard and the carpet, while Omri looked through the figures jumbled up in the biscuit tin. Luckily, the army medical orderly was right on top, still holding his precious doctor's bag. Little Bear, meanwhile, stood beside the pallet bed on which Boone was lying, staring down at him, still clutching the key in his arms. Omri took it from him, thrust the plastic man into the cupboard, and turned the key. He made himself count to 10 while Patrick watched, pop-eyed and scarcely breathing. Then he opened the door. There stood his old friend Tommy, his bag at his feet, rubbing his eyes and frowning around him. His face cleared as he saw Omri. "Well, if it ain't you again, I don't half pick my moments to drop off to sleep, I must say. Thundering great Minnie whining overhead. Thought I was a goner." "What's a Minnie?" asked Patrick in a croaky voice. "What, another of you?" asked Tommy, gaping. "I must have eaten too much cheese for me dinner. Shouldn't give us cheese before a big attack. Very hard on the stomach, especially when it's churned up anyway with nerves. What's a Minnie? It's our name for Minniwerfer. That's one of them big German shells. Making horrible row, they do. Even before they land, a sort of whistle that gets louder and louder, and then kaboom! Then blokes with my job has to pick themselves up and run as quick as you like to where it fell, if it fell in a trench, to take care of the wounded. We've got a wounded man here we want you to take care of, said Omri quickly. Oh, yes? The old redskin again, is it? No, it's another one. Could you step onto my hand? Omri lifted him to where Boone lay, and Tommy at once knelt down beside him and began a professional examination. He's in a bad way, he said after a few moments. Could do with a blood transfusion, really. I'll have to have this bandage off and look at his wound. He was cutting it off with a minute pair of scissors as he spoke. As the bandage opened up, the anxious watchers saw that the tuft of tissue was now red with blood, but Tommy said, Bleeding stopped. That's one good thing. What was it, a bullet? An arrow, said Omri, and Little Bear shivered all over. Oh, yes, of course, I see that now. Well, I'm not much up on arrow wounds. Head's not still in there, I hope. No, it was pulled out. Good, good. Lucky it missed his heart. Well, I'll see what I can do. He got the hypodermic out of his bag and fiddled with it for a moment, then plunged the needle into Boone's chest. After that, he stitched up the wound, put a field dressing on it, and got Little Bear to help him peel off the rest of the old blood-stained Band-Aid. You a pal of his, are you? He asked the Indian. Little Bear stared at him, but did not deny it. Then look here. When he wakes up, you keep giving him these here pills. They're iron, see? Build 'em up. And these as, well, they're for the pain. What we have to hope is that there won't be no infection. We need penicillin for him, said Patrick, who had once had a bad cut on his foot that had turned septic. Tommy looked at him blankly. Penicillin? What's that? Omri nudged Patrick. They hadn't discovered it in his time, he whispered. Best thing I can suggest is a drop of brandy, said Tommy, and taking out a flask, poured something down Boone's throat. Look there, he said cheerfully. He's getting a better color already. He'll open his eyes soon, I wouldn't wonder. Keep him warm, that's the ticket. Now I must be getting back, waking up, I mean. If that there Minnie's landed, I'll be in demand. Ain't no mistake. Omri carried him back to the cupboard. Tommy, he said, what if the Minnie had fallen on you? Couldn't have done, could it? If it had of, I wouldn't be having this here dream, would I? I'd be singing with the heavenly choir. Cheerably, hurry up and shut that door. I think I can hear them calling stretcher bearer already. Omri smiled gratefully at him. He hated to send him back, but obviously he wanted to go. Goodbye, Tommy. Thanks, and good luck. And he shut the door. From the other end of the table, Little Bear suddenly called, Omri, come. Boone, open eyes. Boone, wake up. Omri and Patrick turned. Sure enough, there was Boone staring into Little Bear's face. What happened? He got out in a faint, shaky voice. Nobody liked to tell him, but at last Little Bear had to confess. I shoot, he said. What you talking about, you crazy Injun? I asked you what happened in the picture. Did them settlers beat? Hold on. Out you go. Sorry for the interruption. Again. Whoops. What you talking about, you crazy Injun? I asked you what happened in the picture. Did them settlers beat the Redskins and get to where they was aiming to get to? Or did the Redskins carry off the women and scalp all the men, the dirty, low-down savages? Little Bear drew his breath. His head, which had been hanging in shame, came up sharply, and to Omri's horror, he actually saw his hand go to his belt for his knife. Luckily, it wasn't there, but he jumped to his feet. Boone shut mouth. Not insult Indian braves, or Little Bear shoot again. This time, kill good. Take scalp, hang on pole. Boone scalp too dirty, hang on belt of Indian chief. And he snatched his chief's cloak off Boone's body and swirled it proudly back around his own shoulders. Omri was shocked, but Patrick was laughing so hard he could scarcely hold it in. But he controlled himself enough to wrap Boone up in a cutout blanket to keep him warm. Omri snatched Little Bear up between finger and thumb. Oh, so you're a chief again, are you? He hissed furiously. Chiefs ought to know how to keep their tempers. Here. He picked the broken headdress off the floor and fitted it lopsidedly on Little Bear's head. Now, Chief, have a good look at yourself. And he held Little Bear up before a mirror. Little Bear took one look and then hid his face in his hands. Just you remember what you did to your friend. Not friend, enemy, muttered Little Bear. But the anger had gone out of him. Whatever he is, you've got a job to do. Where are those pills? You are to see that he gets them. We can't even see them. So it's up to you. And when Boone is better, do you know what you're going to do? You're going to make him your blood brother. Little Bear shot him a quick, startled look. Blood brother? You both make little cuts on your wrists and tie them together so the blood mingles. And after that, you can't be enemies ever again. It's an old Indian custom. Little Bear looked baffled. Not Indian custom. I'm sure it is. It was in a film I saw. White man idea, not Indian. Well, couldn't you do it just this once? Little Bear was silent for a moment, thinking. Then Omri saw that crafty look that he knew of old coming onto the Indian's face. Good, he said. Little Bear give Boone medicine, make him my brother when strong, and Omri put plastic in box, make real wife for Little Bear. Not tonight, said Omri firmly. We've had enough excitement. Tonight you stand guard over Boone. Give him his pills when he needs them, drinks of water and all that. Tomorrow, if everything's all right, I'll bring your woman to life. That's a promise. Chapter 16, Brothers. Omri had fully intended to go to sleep. Patrick did almost immediately, but Omri couldn't, tired though he was. Instead, he lay in the candlelight, his head turned toward the table where Boone lay, and Little Bear sat cross-legged next to him, erect and watchful. Sometimes Omri would close his eyes, but he did no more than doze. Each time he opened them, he would meet Little Bear's unblinking stare. It was partly the rat that kept Omri awake. It pattered around the floor for hours, making Omri nervous, but it never came anywhere near the men. Now that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was Omri's thoughts. What was he going to do? He would bring Little Bear's woman to life as he had promised. But then what? It had been hard enough with only one little being to feed, protect, and keep secret. Much harder after Boone came. Now there'd be three, and one a woman. Young as he was, Omri knew that one woman and two men spelled trouble. And what if there should be children? For all Little Bear's unpredictable moods, his demands, his occasional cruelties, Omri liked him. He wanted to keep him, but he knew now that that was impossible. Whichever way he thought about it, the end was the same, disaster of some kind. Whatever magic had brought this strange adventure about must be put to use again to send the little people back to their own place and time. Having decided this, however sadly and reluctantly, Omri's stressful thoughts let go their hold on him. He drifted off to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, dawn was breaking. The morning chorus of birds was just beginning. The candle had burned itself out. The rat had gone to sleep. So had Little Bear, nodding over his bow. Omri peered closely at Boone. The yellow field dressing on his wound moved steadily up and down. His skin had lost that gray look. He was better. Of course, Little Bear shouldn't have gone to sleep, but just the same, he had done his best. Omri slipped out of bed. His blazer was hanging from a hook at the back of his door. He took the paper bag with the woman in out of the pocket. Moving on tiptoe, he went to the cupboard, took out the plastic soldier, put in the plastic Indian girl, and locked the cupboard again. When he heard little movements, he unlocked the cupboard and opened the door a crack so that she wouldn't be frightened in the dark. Then he got back into bed, covered himself with all except his eyes, and stayed perfectly still to watch what would happen. At first, nothing did. Then slowly, stealthily, the door was pushed a little farther open. Out crept a beautiful Indian girl. There was enough light in the room now for Omri to see the black of her hair, the chestnut brown of her skin, the bright red of her dress. He couldn't see her expression, but he guessed that she was bewildered. She glanced all around and at once spotted Boone lying on the ground and Little Bear dozing beside him. She approached them cautiously. For a few moments she lingered behind Little Bear, clearly not sure whether she should touch and wake him or not. She decided against it, and circling Boone's feet, sat herself cross-legged on his other side, facing Little Bear. She sat staring at him. The three of them were so utterly still that they might still have been plastic. Then a blackbird outside gave a particularly loud chirp, and Little Bear sat up sharply. At once he saw her. His whole body gave a jolt. Omri felt a prickling up the back of his neck, the way they looked at each other. It went on for a long time. Then, slowly, and both together, they rose to their feet. Little Bear spoke to her quietly in a strange language. She answered. He smiled. Standing there on either side of Boone, not touching, they talked for some minutes in low voices. Then he put out his hand and she put hers into it. They stood silently. Then their hands dropped. Little Bear pointed at Boone and began talking again. The girl crouched down, touched Boone gently and expertly. She looked up at Little Bear and nodded. Then Little Bear looked around the room. He saw Omri. Omri put his fingers to his lips and shook his head as if to say, "Don't tell her about me." Little Bear nodded. He took the girl by the hand and led her to the seed box, up the ramp, and into the longhouse. After a moment or two, he came out again. He ran the length of the table till he stood at its edge, as near to Omri as he could get. "Do you like her?" Omri asked. Little Bear put his hands to his belt and unfastened it. "I like. Fit wife for chief. I pay much for her." And he handed Omri the belt, made of shiny white beads. "Now, Omri, hear Little Bear. Woman say, Boone good, not die. Little Bear pleased. Omri take Boone, put in longhouse. Woman take care of, give little medicines." He held up the pill boxes. "Omri get food, make wedding feast." "How can you have a wedding feast with only 2 Indians?" "Yes, not good. Omri make more Indian. Come to feast?" he asked hopefully. When Omri shook his head, Little Bear's face fell. "Little Bear, wouldn't you rather have your wedding feast at home with your own tribe?" Little Bear was no fool. He understood at once. He stood still, staring at Omri. "Omri put in box, send back," he said. His voice was very flat. Omri couldn't tell if he liked the idea or not. "What do you think? Wouldn't it be better?" Very slowly the Indian nodded his head. "And Boone?" "Boone too. Make him my brother first." "Yes, then I'll send you back." "When?" "When Boone's well enough." Once Omri had decided, every day that passed was important because it was one day nearer to the last. Patrick was as sad as he was, but he didn't argue against Omri's decision. "It's the only way, really," Patrick said. After that, he didn't talk about it anymore. He just tried to be at Omri's house as much as possible. He couldn't do things with Boone much, of course, even though in a day or two Boone was sitting up in the longhouse and demanding to talk to his horse, which was brought to the entrance for the purpose, and whining for all sorts of special food and drink. "I can't be expected to get my strength back if you won't give me some of the hard stuff," he nagged. He even pretended to have a relapse. Omri pinched a nose dropper full of whiskey from his parents' drinks cupboard and squeezed a large drop down Boone's throat before the Indian girl, whose name was Bright Star, as a reference to her shining eyes, Omri supposed, had succeeded in conveying the fact that Boone was perfectly all right and that his faint was faked. Still, after he'd had his drink, Boone seemed so much better that Omri and Patrick decided it wouldn't do him any harm. He's used to it after all. And thereafter, Boone got a liquor ration 3 times a day, and did very well on it. "He'll be ready to go back tomorrow," said Omri on the 4th day, when Boone, having had a leg up from Little Bear, managed to ride his horse around the seed box at a steady walk. "They'll probably look after him better than we can in his own time." A thought struck him, and he fished out of his pocket the drawing Boone had done. "Boone, is this your hometown?" "Sure is." Omri studied it closely under the magnifying glass. Away up the street, he saw a little sign reading "Doctor." "Is he a good doctor?" "About as good as any out west, I reckon. Fish a bullet out of a man's arm or cut his foot off for snake bite, as neat as can be. I've seen him bring a pal of mine back from the dead, near enough, by putting a hot coal in his belly button. He never operates till man's dead drunk, and he don't charge extra for liquor neither." Omri and Patrick looked at each other. "You'd feel that you were in good hands with this or a doctor looking after you?" Patrick asked worriedly. "Sure would. Anyhow, don't need no sawbones now. My wound's healing up fine. So long as I can get my whiskey, I'll be good as new." Boone bore not the slightest ill will toward Little Bear for having shot him. "That there's an Injun's natural nature. Poor, simple critter could no more help himself than I can keep away from a horse and a bottle." The night before Omri had decided to send them back, they held the brotherhood ceremony. "I wish we could ask our brothers," said Patrick to Omri at school that day. "Supposing we tell them one day about this, they'll never believe us." "Sending them back," said Omri slowly, "doesn't mean the magic won't work anymore. I'm going to put the key away somewhere so I won't be tempted, but it will always be there." Patrick looked at him wonderingly. "I never thought of that," he said slowly. "So there'd be nothing to stop us, months or even years from now, from bringing Boone and Little Bear back again to visit?" "I don't know," said Omri. "Maybe their time is different from ours. It would be awful if they were old but he couldn't say dead. Both Boone and Little Bear came from such dangerous times." Omri shivered and changed the subject. "As for our brothers coming," he said, "all I want of my brothers is to keep that rat in its cage. The rat had been caught by Omri after a long, patient wait with cheese and a fishing net, and Omri had threatened Gillen with the worst fate imaginable if he let it get away again. The two boys went to Yap's after school and bought feast food for the ceremony: salted nuts, chips, and chocolate. Omri bought a quarter-pound of the best meat at the butcher's for tiny hamburgers. A teaspoonful would have been enough, but the butcher wasn't interested in that. They got bread, biscuits, cake, and soda from Omri's mother, and Omri sneaked another dropper full of the hard stuff, without which Boone would certainly not consider it a festive occasion at all. Omri was rather surprised Boone had agreed to be brother to a stinkin' redskin at all, but Boone actually seemed rather to like the idea. "'Tain't just anyone gets to be brother to an Injun chief, you know," he said proudly, as he rolled up his sleeves and Bright Stars carefully swabbed his arm with soap and water. But when he saw Little Bear sharpening his knife on a pebble, he turned pale. "Heck, it'll hurt," he muttered, but Patrick told him not to be a coward. "It's only a little nick. It's nothing at all." "Easy for you," retorted Boone. "I ain't so sure this is such a nice idea after all." But he cheered up when he saw the campfire being kindled and smelled the meat Bright Stars was cooking on the pointed stick, and when Omri gave him a good swig from the dropper, he swaggered up to Little Bear and offered his arm with a drunken flourish. "Chop away, brother," he said loudly.